Thank you, everybody. Good morning. We're here to talk about building codes and advancing them and what we're seeing. Kind of timely right now. We have a new building code coming into effect May 1st of this year, which is next week. So we'll have our panelists here today are Justin Pockar with SAIT. We have Laura McNutt from Dunsky and Climate Advisors, and Justin Phill from the City of Edmonton Senior Energy Engineer. And myself, Juan Monterrosa. So I am the Senior Program Manager with Emission Neutral Building Exchange. So you heard a bit about us this morning. What we're trying to do and what our aim is to go through and accelerate the transition to emission neutral buildings, work with industry and how we get to there faster by providing the information that's needed across the industry where we've been seeing gaps. So we talked about it a bit. Also this morning was, our partnership is with the City of Edmonton, City of Calgary, our funding partners. We're through the Climate Innovation Fund, Alberta Eco Trust, as well as Enercan through the Codes Accelerator program. Part of our team as well, you're here today with SRIA and Alberta Eco Trust, so ENBIX falls within that ecosystem of information. We talk a lot about resources in ENBIX. A big part of our work is how do we go through and provide everything that's kind of out there right now, amplify a little bit. Some of the comments that we had heard in the past was there's a lot of work that's happening, but how do we bring it all to one place where people can find what they need, whether you'd be with the municipality, with a builder, engineer, architect, or if you're in the trades as well. So one of the resources that we are going to show today, so there's a QR code there for it. With Build Alberta, we've been speaking to them. They created their first video right now on what the new energy code is going to be for Part 9 buildings. So it's really like high level of an overview. The biggest part is the tiers, which we're going to be talking about a bit today. And stay tuned for more of those coming up from Build Alberta. And lastly, we're really looking to collaborate with everybody. Our biggest thing is how do you come to us to find those resources, give us resources so we can put them out there for everybody to see, come attend some of our events, whether it be with the community of practices, our webinars, join a community of practice, whether it be in the City of Calgary, through municipalities, through training as well. And also we're always looking for people to partner with for some of these events. So if you have an event and you need some help with it, whether it be on the funding side or a partner, or looking for different ideas, even for speakers, come to us to partner. So we will start off today with Justin Pockar.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Juan, and it's nice to be among friends here, although I've just said to a couple of my colleagues, let's all think about how we would get people who aren't normally at these events to attend them, because sometimes preaching to the choir is fun, but it's nice also to have the heretics in the room. Anyway, that's my soapbox message for the day. Let's talk about this. So this is I call this presentation a treatise on emission neutral buildings, but probably the more accurate title would be Innovation Sucks, but it probably doesn't have to. And the reason I think this is because we're in a new place where we are talking about energy codes in a very progressive way, and I think that's interesting. And I think we've reached a tipping point where the idea of emission neutral buildings is very real. And I guess I'm going to give you some of my opinions on those for whatever those are worth, and hopefully spark an interesting discussion with our friends here. I think the first key, let's understand this problem a little bit, and this is understanding it from my perspective, first and foremost, I guess. I don't know if this is true. I've never quantified this, but it seems logically sound and it seems pretty reasonable. But when I was back in consulting, we always used the 30-30-40 rule. And that rule was essentially this. If I have 100 units of energy efficiency, whatever that is, gigajoules, percent, doesn't matter, I can probably address about 30 of them through the design of the building. I can address a further 30 through the construction, i.e. quality control, air barriers, all of those things that said, did you actually assemble this thing as intended? And the last one was about 40% through operations. And I got to point something out, which is we don't control that 40%. That should be alarming, because you would probably not get on an airplane if you thought only 60% of it was within the pilot's control. Yet we do that every day with buildings. I think that's an interesting construct. The next statement I'll make is quite effectively, dollars are at least equal to, but much more likely greater than tech, and that's technology. Why do I say that? I say that because in my opinion and in my experience in buildings, an emissions neutral building has stopped being a technical problem, and it stopped being a technical problem about 20 years ago. It's now an economics problem. And being an economics problem means you have to answer the right questions. And I will be very blunt, as an industry, we are doing an appallingly bad job of answering the right questions. We think that there's a tech solution to everything, that if I just figure out the gigajoules and follow them closely enough, that somehow the building will work and everyone has a great set of moral compass that will lead them to make these right choices. I would suggest, and I apologize if there's developers in the room, but I think most developers are much more concerned with the bottom line than they are feeling good about their project at the end of the day, and that's pretty reasonable. They're in business for a reason. So again, I think the economics question of emission neutral buildings is probably the most germane question you can ask. Let's go to carrots and sticks. So this is where we start to talk a little bit about codes. Energy codes. It's a relatively new phenomenon, but let's talk about them in concept. I think, first of all, they did something wonderful, which is they turned needs into wants, or sorry, wants into needs, pardon me. What do I mean by that? I mean, energy efficiency was a nice to have up until the energy codes came along. But the minute you codify a code, you basically say, I am obligated to meet this level of energy efficiency, and even if I hate it, I have to do it. Which means I can now talk about competition between my consultant group and my peers that says who gets there the fastest. And that is a really interesting construct because it transforms the idea of energy efficiency from being a moral question, again, into an economics and an approvals question. And that is important because it does give legitimacy to the problem. I think in general, I'm going to give you my humble opinion, and I'm right or wrong, I helped write the thing, so I guess praise or blame is completely appropriate here. Most certainly, the energy codes are increasing in scope. So they started off with just energy efficiency. They're already dealing with operational carbon in the next iteration, embodied carbon to follow. So we are seeing a scope increase, and it's probably warranted and it's probably intelligent. We're definitely seeing a performance increase. The minimum standards are rising. Tiered codes are a thing. They are existing. We have the technical requirements for them. And that's a good thing, again, because I believe that you need both an incentive program to draw the high-end orders and to push from the bottom. Unfortunately, the clarity aspect of them is plummeting. And that is a problem, because to me, if I have a code that does not have clarity, I have a code that is largely unenforceable. And that's deeply problematic. As anyone who knows me knows, I spent about 15 years enforcing codes. And if I don't have clarity in them, I have almost nothing to hold over someone. And the last one is, let's talk about carrots. And I am a personal believer in development incentives. And that means tying your development permit and what you are building to its overall performance at the end of the day. And I'm half joking when I say it's even better than gold, because we always talked about things like incentive programs and throwing $50,000 of cash at a project. Well, if I have a $100 million building, $50,000 is not even a rounding error. I'm not getting out of bed to do major decisions on a building for $50K. If you give me 4 floors of FAR, now we can talk. I am very, very interested in what you have to say about performance. So I think that's the reality of that. They certainly have a way of encouraging beyond minimum standards. And that leads me to thoughts on progress. So this is where the rambling starts. If that wasn't rambling enough to begin with, here we go. Let's talk about this. Replacement versus reduction versus renovation versus revolution. I don't know. I'm not even going to pretend to have an answer on this. But I will say this. If your scheme for carbon reduction has a 20-year time frame, you better build into that scheme things like fusion. I am not, that is the reality of these. We were just talking earlier. The dawn of the car changed civic planning in 15 years. Changed it. A 1938 plan assumed people were going to live downtown and walk to work and ride a streetcar. All of a sudden, Ford and General Motors decided that they can build a second car cheaply. A post-war generation comes home and decides that what they really want to do is live comfortably in the suburbs, and cities changed in a decade. So a 25-year plan that doesn't allow for flexibility is not a plan. It's effectively a dream. And I'm going to be sounding a little critical on that. I think part of that, what we have to do is realize that the idea of carbon is both an operational problem, but from my perspective, the embodied carbon is actually the one I'm worried about. And why? Because, quite frankly, the embodied carbon budget is spent today. Not over 25 years, not over 50 years. It can't be replaced when I come up with fusion in the future. It's a fixed moniker, and that is a problem. And we are largely kind of wallowing in the world of operational carbon because it's simple, but I think we have to tackle the more complicated issue of embodied carbon. Anybody who's ever looked at a retrofit program should obviously say, wait a second, that's a direct, I'm not going to say attack on it, but certainly a direct consideration of it. And the last one I will say is policies, guidance, and reality is confirmation. I know that's a Boeing 787. Now forget about Boeing's problems currently, because it could have been, no, because it could have been an Airbus A350. It doesn't matter. But I will say this: if the next time you're on one of those, humor me. Go to the map screen and punch in the airplane, and you will find it's somewhere between 31 and 39,000 feet, somewhere between 500 and 525 miles an hour, and the outside temperature is minus 53 degrees C. I can model a complicated object under those very stringent operating characteristics very, very well. What are the operating characteristics of your building? The answer is nobody in this room has a clue, because they change daily. That's troubling. So we have to learn how to deal with buildings in the context of reality. And that means we have to look at utility costs and reductions, and we have to go tools and maintenance and joules, oh my. You have to be able to talk about the lifespan of the building and how it is going to operate and how its effect on the environment is going to be, not as designed, but as operated. And the world of as operated, I mean, we could do an entire conference just on that. But again, I'm going to hypothesize, and I'm way over time, that it is an important question, so I'm going to end there. Thank you. Karl Popper is a hero of mine, and he used to always talk about falsifiability of ideas. And in my opinion, emission neutral buildings and sustainability needs that falsifiability criteria. If I can't tell you something's wrong, you have not made a scientific statement. And that's important because by showing it's wrong is how you get better. Now I am done for real.
That was great. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren McNutt. I'm a managing consultant with Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors. I feel a bit like the odd man out. I feel like my name should be Justin, or at least start with a J, but thank you for allowing me to join the group as a name that starts with L. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the, share some of the findings from some recent projects that we've been working on, specifically on Part 9 homes. And we're really seeing some trends at Dunsky and through some of our work. We're really seeing this shift and need to regulate more, become more stringent. Obviously, we need to build better, more efficient, more low carbon, resilient buildings from the start. We do that through regulation, getting to the scale, the scope, and pace that's required to get to our 2050 net zero goals. But in addition to that, and I really liked how Justin talked about the carrots and the sticks. We need those sticks, but we also need to provide the market with support in order to comply with those regulations, and then to also prepare the market for the more stringent regulations to come. So, we all know MBC 2020 now demonstrates a pathway to net zero with those progressive series of steps from Tier 1 to Tier 5. But as we're thinking through now how to actually comply with MBC 2020, we're also already having discussions about what's to come in the National Building Code 2025. If you haven't already done so, public consultation is open right now until Monday next week on some of the new priorities, which are code harmonization, climate change adaptation and mitigation, alterations to existing buildings. And then we're seeing other strategies in other jurisdictions to complement these codes around building energy benchmarking and disclosure, building performance standards, green building standards, and of course in BC, we've got now a net zero carbon step code. All of these are going to help us get to our goals but we can't do it without the supporting mechanisms. It's really great. All jurisdictions have now signed a harmonization agreement with the expectation to harmonize the adoption of the model national codes across the country. But jurisdictions do still have the flexibility to select which tiers or single tier, to adopt and/or adapt, and on the timeline to reach those net zero energy ready targets. So there is still a lot of variability across the country in terms of code adoption. BC, of course, leading the charge with their STEP code. It's not necessarily the MBC 2020, but very similar. Alberta, of course, we know, adopted Tier 1. Manitoba, in the same. They're also working with the federal government to accelerate adoption to the next tiers. Ontario, we expected, they did adopt MBC 2020, but they did maintain their SB 12 standard, which was under their previous code. We had expected them to adopt Tier 3, but that didn't happen. We're seeing similar things happening. New Brunswick, in their climate action plan, expects to adopt Tier 1, but accelerate adoption to Tier 2, and we expect other jurisdictions to do the same. Personally, I'm a bit disappointed that we didn't see provinces adopt tiers to really send that clear market signal of what's to come. I commend them, of course, for trying to harmonize the national building codes, but I would have liked to have seen more ambition. Tier 1 is small incremental change beyond MBC 2015. Of course, we now have the tiers, but we're now just seeing a reflection of mechanical equipment standards improvements and some building envelope targets. I would have really liked to have seen some greater ambition. So, how can we encourage new construction that exceeds those minimum codes, Tier 1, inform more national, ambitious national codes going forward, and accelerate the adoption of energy efficiency, resiliency, and emissions reductions compared to that lengthier code process, because now we're, 5 years out before the next code. So that requires a comprehensive strategy. That includes leveraging existing voluntary new home certifications, capacity building, training, technical support to build the skills that are needed, incentives, financing, rebates, building consumer demand, and thinking really strategically about inclusive design. I'm going to talk about those coming up. So, in terms of industry-led voluntary certification programs, there are 7 government and industry-led voluntary new home certifications. They really provide a range of opportunities to build above code. We've got Energy Star for new homes, Novo Climat, and LEED that kind of are getting us to that Tier 2, 20% above reference building. Energy Star is really seen as a gateway to really help the broader industry kind of reach beyond code. And then you've got these more ambitious certifications like CHBA, Net Zero Energy Ready, Passive House, and others. However, these certifications make up a very small portion of the number of total homes that are certified across Canada, and there's even less licensed builders in Canada. And when I think about market transformation, I think we can do a better job in terms of preparing the broader industry for future codes. How can we get more builders to become licensed, to certify their buildings, be able to test these different approaches and technologies so that they're better prepared for the more stringent codes to come? We've engaged with a number of industry stakeholders across Canada through a number of different projects, and they all say the same thing. Additional training, capacity building is really needed across Canada, and that extends beyond the trades. Building officials, policymakers, and others. There's also real opportunity, I think, to even test different approaches and training from the prescriptive path and performance path. Energy Star for new homes, for example, 90% of licensed builders build to the prescriptive path. 10% are going the performance route, but we're seeing really great progress and impact. Those that go the performance path are reaching closer to Tier 4 performance. So there's real opportunity to help the market move towards those performance-based approaches. And then there's the Code Acceleration Fund, other programs that can really help build those skills across Canada. Incremental costs, huge barrier to building to high performance, and it's really around the uncertainty. If you look at this chart, there's 3 different studies that assessed the incremental cost to build to these different certifications or to the different tiers, and they range in price, range in costs. And that's probably reflective of a number of factors, depending on the measures that are included, depending on their location, cost to build, the size of the building, and whatnot. But it really demonstrates that there's a range of costs estimates, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and that results in the market increasing their costs to account for that risk premium. We've heard from stakeholders the need for detailed costing data, and I think we can never talk about costs without talking about savings and benefits as well. I think the market would really benefit from having those detailed costing savings data to really demonstrate the value of advanced building practices and technologies. We need utility data. We need to understand electrical service capacity, and a whole host of other information. Pairing codes, certifications, and incentives are a successful way to drive market transformation. Nouveau Climat in Quebec has incentives from $2,000 to up to $4,000 to build a Nouveau Climat home. They're seeing great penetration, probably the best out of any voluntary certification. 8% of new home certifications, 8% of new home completes have received a Nouveau Climat certification. By comparison, the next best is Energy Star for new homes. They've achieved 7% penetration in Canada, but they've also been in the market for longer. And I think the other certifications have seen less market penetration, but they're also newer in market. But there's real opportunity to increase that market penetration. Increasing consumer demand. Customers are increasingly valuing energy efficiency in their home purchase decisions, but there is still lack of awareness about the costs, the benefits, and that's preventing people from pursuing higher performance homes. I think governments, other players can play a significant role in promoting the benefits of higher performing homes, and promoting those voluntary home certifications and the value of building to those types of certifications and getting that label on your home. Strategic and inclusive design. Low, moderate income households, I think we need to really recognize that low to moderate income households and other underserved communities are less likely to build new homes. That doesn't mean we shouldn't incent new construction. We just have to recognize who's going to go through those types of programs and that we need other strategies to reach that sector or that segment of the market. Low to moderate income households tend to be renters. They tend to live in older, less efficient homes. What we need to do is have strategies, and we've seen some really successful programs that are really targeting affordable housing, whether it be single family, multifamily. FCM's Sustainable Affordable Housing Program offers financing and grants. CMHC's Co-Investment Fund, not-for-profits like Habitat for Humanity have done really great work. What we have learned, there is some opportunity when we can do a better job in supporting rural, remote, and indigenous communities. They're often further out. They don't necessarily have access to energy advisors, skilled trades, builders who are building to higher performance. They're not in close proximity, so that increases costs, time to build. So I think there's opportunity there for programs and support to help with that. And there are opportunities for voluntary new home certifications and programs to support a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce. We often hear that we don't have enough capacity to meet the demand. So let's expand the net wider. We need to, of course, increase the skills of those already in the industry, but how can we bring those who are underrepresented in the industry right now into the market? So youth, women, BIPOC community members, and others. There's a real opportunity here to bring them into the industry to help build more high-performance homes. And that requires additional support and approaches and strategies. So I'm going to wrap this up really quickly. Sorry, I'm probably over time. 5 key takeaways, just to reiterate. We need to first use voluntary certifications, incentives, and technical support to prepare the market for compliance with higher code tiers and those future code requirements. We need to create market awareness and drive demand for higher performing homes. When the demand is there, the market will respond accordingly. There are opportunities to improve market supports, costing analysis, and training to really address some of those barriers to building high-performance homes. We need to address market needs for everyone, and that means targeted strategies for affordable housing, rural and remote, and Indigenous communities. And we need to expand that training and support for underrepresented groups. Lastly, and this kind of just brings it all together, these do not operate in silos. One strategy will not solve all our problems. We need to have this as an integrated, comprehensive strategy that really helps the market comply with current code, going beyond that, and then eventually having to meet more stringent requirements and regulations. And sorry, I will end right there with a quote from an industry stakeholder that I interviewed earlier this year: uniformity. That is the key word. We need to harmonize our programs, our tiers, our codes, our standards. If this doesn't happen, our programs will not be useful. We are all working towards that net zero goal, but we have to do this in a harmonized way, and it needs to be seamless. So I will leave it there.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Justin Phill. I'm the Senior Green Building and Energy Code Engineer with the City of Edmonton. We've been talking a lot about carrots and sticks today. I work in the sticks department in the city: safety codes, permits, and inspections. I just wanted to start off today just by talking a little bit about the codes in general, kind of the background, where they're developed, and how they fit into our regulatory landscape. So the newest codes coming out and into effect in Alberta, as Juan mentioned earlier on, are the new 2020 building, fire, plumbing, and energy codes. These are developed by NRCan, and they're adopted individually by the provinces, as Lauren and Justin have mentioned in their presentations. So Alberta's first energy code was the National Energy Code for Buildings, the 2011 version, which is adopted back in 2016. And at the same time, this slide really just looks at the NECB specifically, but Part 936 of the National Building Code was also adopted at the same time, which set our minimum level of energy performance for residential buildings as well. Thought there was going to be big changes. I was an HVAC consultant at the time too, so we were getting all ramped up to completely set up to redesign our buildings, pack on more insulation, need new windows, all new HVAC systems. And when we ran the models and the numbers, things really didn't change too much with that iteration of the code. A couple of years later, and just when I joined the city, the 2017 National Energy Code for Buildings was adopted as well. So we've had this one in force for the last couple of years. It was about a 10 to 14% improvement over NECB 2011. So we saw things like more insulation, more exterior insulation on our buildings, slightly more efficient HVAC systems, but not a transformative change to go to all electric. And then this year, in just a week, we have the 2020 versions, which we're expecting somewhere between a 5 to 15% improvement in our building performance, depending on the building archetypes. The end goal of all of these codes is that we'll have net zero ready buildings by 2030. This is a goal set by our federal government to meet their emissions and climate targets. The new tiered system that's introduced in the 2020 codes, so both Part 9, which has 5 tiers of performance, as well as Part 3, which also has 4 tiers performance, chart our path forward to net zero ready buildings. So when we reach these top tiers, we're expected to have a net zero ready building if we can meet those targets. So there's 3 paths to comply with these levels of energy performance. So there's our prescriptive path, where we just take out the code book, follow it line by line, and we end up with a code compliant building. And in the new Part 9 codes, there's also tiered prescriptive paths. So there's a point system where if you have better insulation, if you have better windows, if you have a better HVAC system, you get points. So for folks that don't want to do an energy model, you have that option. The in-between, if you want to do a little bit of math for your building envelope and make some trade-offs, you can get out Excel, open up the spreadsheet, and see what you can trade off there. So if I take a little bit of insulation out of my walls, I can put more on my roof to compensate for it. And our most popular path now is the performance path. I think we've seen this percentage on this chart go up year over year, and as the codes have changed. So in 2011, I think when I ran this same pie chart back in the day, the performance path was about 66 or 67% of all applications that we saw come through our building permit office. And this applies to both residential and commercial buildings. So for those that maybe are a little further back in the room, the blue slice of the pie is the percentage of applicants choosing the prescriptive path. The red is the applicants choosing the trade-off path, and yellow is the performance path. So we're up to 80% now. I think there's, the industry is really starting to see the value of completing an energy model for both cost savings and to demonstrate the level of energy performance that is required by the codes today. And the last thing I wanted to talk about around the tiered system here is that, are we moving fast enough? This graph shows the relative improvement of energy performance since the energy codes were first adopted here in Alberta. So on the left side of the chart, the NECB 2011 is our baseline here. And the blue line that goes from 2016 to 2024 is how the introduction of each code has improved our energy performance relative to NECB 2011. So we can see that since 2016, we've improved 20% over 8 years based on how the codes have improved. And if we just take a straight line from here to 2030, when we want to hit the highest tiers and have our net zero buildings ready to go, we have to greatly increase that rate of energy performance. So we're expecting, we need to go 60% improvement over 6 years, which is 10% per year, which is well above the 20% over the 8 years that we've had the energy codes so far. If we just kind of line up the tiers along that same line, not sure how this will go. There isn't a roadmap for the tiers in Alberta yet, so this is just speculation for anybody that's taking pictures. We're looking at tier 2 around 2027, tier 3 in 2029, and we'd have to hit tier 4 by 2030, if all goes to plan. So we'll see how the next few years go, but I think this is a call to action for all of us to really look at how we're designing buildings and realize that how soon these targets are coming and the improvement that we need to make in that short amount of time. I don't have a quote at the end of mine, I'm sorry. So that's it for me, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Could we get the QR code for the questions also? I think we had it at the beginning in case anybody wants to send some questions in. But I had some that we had kind of put together for the team here, just to kind of chat through a few as we go through the ones from the audience as well. Well, actually, one thing I will say is, sorry, it was in Saskatchewan, they're actually doing tier 2, and they have an incentive program for each tier above that, starting in January.
I need to update my map.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's great.
So with that, in terms of like the trends, hurdles, and synergies that you're seeing right now in each of your industries when it comes to energy efficiency in buildings, 7 years, as Justin was showing, after these initial codes came out, what has kind of, which way are they going? And it's actually great that you had that graph there, because you can see it's flatlined, I guess. And at the end of the day, like, that is the minimum that's required, but that's not saying that people are already doing better than that. I think we've seen that in some jurisdictions already. It's like we have the leaders that are building better than that, which hopefully it doesn't make it as daunting. But yeah, I guess each from your standpoint is like those trends that you've seen in the past 7 years and what we need to build off of. You go, Justin.
Want me to go first?
Justin, Phill, Pete.
Sure. So maybe I'll just elaborate a little bit more on those changes from like NECB 2011 to 2017 to 2020. So we saw that there really wasn't any transformative change besides adding a little bit more insulation, using better glazing products, maybe getting a higher efficient HVAC unit for the most things. But I think there were some changes that each code introduced, or things that we thought about in design and construction a little bit more. In NECB 2011, I think that really brought energy modeling at least more forward and to people's minds and earlier on in the design process. Before that, when we were just doing lead modeling or some other compliance types of modeling, I think, I get brought in early for that too, but not right off the hop all the time. And then when the energy code came in, the first couple of projects, it was like a week before building permit submission, they're like, hey, Justin, can you do this energy model and make sure that we comply with the code? And it worked out most of the time, which was good. But following on, I found myself more in the concept design and schematic design meetings as well too, just because I think they really saw the value of looking at energy performance, putting those things together earlier, which is really great. When NECB 2017 came around, most folks were pretty comfortable with energy modeling, but the big change there was the addition of thermal bridging calculations and kind of the depth of what was required for that as well too. So we weren't just thinking about the studs in our walls or the Z-girts or anything like that. Now we're looking at our corner transitions, our parapet transitions, our balconies, and all those other aspects of the building envelope that are really critical for heat loss as well too. Again, it was a bit of a surprise at first, and then after that the architects were like, hey, how can we make this detail better? So I think it really brought that conversation forward. So I'm really curious to see what 2020 will bring as well too, what conversations will spur from that, besides the energy improvement that comes along with it.
I agree with Justin in the sense that, we haven't seen necessarily anything incredibly transformative, but we do see leaders. You mentioned it. There are a number of leaders who are demonstrating great projects that it can be done, and I think there's an opportunity to showcase that more. And what I think is exciting is that we're talking about it more. We now have a tiered national model code. Even though the provinces hasn't necessarily adopted all the tiers, they've adopted a single one, it is starting to send that signal, here's where we're going. Would I have liked to have seen carbon in MBC 2020? Yes, but it's being talked about for MBC 2025. When I think about, what is our end goal? It's net zero carbon. We need to make sure that the codes are aligned to help us get there, and we can't just focus on energy. It's an absolutely important part, but we need to also be talking about carbon. And it's nice to see that that's becoming a priority for MBC 2025. So it's exciting to see where we're going. It's going to be a sprint at the end, but we're talking about it, and there's a lot of people collaborating, which is really exciting.
All right, I'm going to take some from the audience because there's some really good ones coming up here. Actually, Justin Pockar, this would be for you. To what extent is more training required on the codes, and what might that look like?
Oh, geez. So I think that's a really interesting question. Part of me wants to say none, and I'll explain why I say none. It's 18th century thermodynamics. That is literally what we're dealing with in the energy code. So the conceptual framework for it is relatively straightforward. However, now I'm going to do a 180 on my own answer. I think as an industry, construction has a fundamental challenge, which is in order to gain work, you have to price it. You have to price it competitively. And that competitive pricing can only result, or it only is derived from how the labor is applied. The materials are essentially a fixed cost for almost every bidder. Because I can only get work by modifying my labor cost, my labor, I want to do exactly what I did last time because it's the only predictable model I have. Because of that, we have a tendency to stagnate in the construction industry. I think that notion of training is what you need to address that fundamental constructive problem. So at the end of the day, I don't believe it is skills training in the conventional sense, i.e. teaching a bunch of people how to do math or teaching them what thermodynamics looks like. I think it's much more a training on how to instruct owners, operators, or owners, developers, builders, contractors to be given the space to innovate and try something that is innovative and allow them to give them the kind of space to work in. So
the training is probably, I'm going to say, I feel like I'm bordering on rambling. I want the training to actually talk about industry solutions, not technical solutions. And again, I will go right back to do the dangerous thing of self-quoting. That is how you address the economic challenge of emissions neutral buildings, which to me is the foundational one. If I can build a nuclear submarine, I can build an emission neutral building. I guarantee it. The difference between those two, the US Navy doesn't have a problem dropping $2.5 billion on that submarine. That's the difference, fundamentally. It's not the engineering, it's not the problem scale, it's not the physics and the math behind it. It's one of them has a really deep wallet and the other one doesn't. So that's what the training needs to address. Sorry. Ought to address. It's absoluted that for a second.
Lauren, Justin, anything else on that?
I guess I would just say there definitely still is a need to, I completely agree with Justin that I think the default is lower cost solution, what I'm familiar with. So it's increasing that familiarity with new technologies, new practices, providing those demonstration projects. I think the detailed costing analysis and savings analysis is really necessary. I don't know if that's necessarily called that training, but it's really providing that information to the market so that they can see the benefit, they can see the cost, they can build that into their risk when they're costing out for a home. You know, I think the other thing I talked about was, you know, expanding the pool of the market and making sure that we're leveraging community colleges, universities. I'm in Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Community College, doing wonderful work. They've got advanced building technology programs, demonstration projects. You know, how can we sort of train that next generation of workers who are going to come into this market so that they're prepared to build more high-performance homes? The other thing is newcomers who already have the training, and we just need to accelerate their ability to work in Canada so that we can build more high-efficient homes. There's some really great work. I love what ENBIX is doing, SRIA, and the Future Skills Center. I mean, there's some really amazing work being done by others, and I think we can leverage that. So I think it's about amplifying what we already have versus duplicating. So
I'm gonna kind of put two together here. So the question is Alberta not allowing non-tiered pathways to compliance? And is there any incentives coming from Calgary or Edmonton to look at the other tiers? So I know, Justin, if you could speak from Edmonton's side.
Sure. So sorry, the first question was, are there non-tiered compliance pathways?
Yeah.
Okay. From what I heard, just to give the simple answer, is yes for Part 9 buildings, and then no for like our Part 3 NECB buildings, but there isn't really a big difference between the tiered performance path and the regular performance path in NECB 2020. We'd be modeling our buildings the same way for Part 3 just because we're adopting Tier 1 and it's 0% better than the code, so nothing really changes there. On the Part 9 side, what I've heard is that we are allowing the prescriptive and trade-off N936.5 for those who really know their code well, compliance path, which is the performance path that we're using currently, and that the tiered performance and tiered prescriptives, which are 936.7 and 8, for the code geeks in the audience, are optional. So when Tier 2 is adopted, then all the requirements, such as the peak cooling load requirement, and I think and then a couple changes to your reference building modeling will come along when Tier 2 comes into effect, whenever that is. In terms of incentive programs, we looked at developing some at the City of Edmonton. They have not taken off yet, but we have some numbers of, hey, this is what we would expect to hit Tier 2 and Tier 3. Maybe we can incentivize 50% of the capital cost to get you there, because it's, as we've seen in some of the studies, I think you had them in your slides there, it's not a huge capital cost to go from Tier 1 to Tier 2 or 3, as much as it is to go from Tier 1 to Tier 5.
And for those from Calgary, there is the green stream that goes through, and there is essentially that incentive of meeting a certain performance for buildings, and then you essentially go to the front of the line. I think, is Dick in here somewhere? Front of the line for the development permit. Question for Lauren: who do you think should lead the harmonization process you described in terms of putting it all together?
Well, I don't know. That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, somebody does have to take the lead. You know, the federal government could play a pretty significant role in convening, but I really do think we need better collaboration. And collaboration is, like, I'm talking about integration, talking really about getting all the people in the room. It's not just about sitting across the room and talking. It's about how do we truly integrate all the great things that everyone is doing and work together in a truly integrated way so that we're not duplicating efforts. You know, I said this before, amplify. We really need to be avoiding duplication. We need to be leveraging the strengths of all these different organizations and groups. So given we're trying to harmonize nationally, it could be the federal government, but it doesn't have to be. But I'm not sure, I'm not really answering this question very well, but it would be great to see a convening of multiple voices together in true collaboration. So I agree we need it, but
I think the right answer was ENBIX.
right, it's all right.
So, yeah.
I should have gone there, yeah.
Another one we have here, these are really technical actually, the crowd is like pretty good here. Can regulation increase costs for poorly performing buildings to create an economic shift in their value? So I think it's like, I mean, I feel like the way our presentations went, we went from like a little bit nebulous to like all Canada and then like really detailed. So I want to get like, I guess, each of your takes on that of like, what does it look like in terms of putting value on energy efficiency, and is there a way to use that in terms of, I guess it would be, from this question, regulating it? I mean, the other part of this is like the carbon tax intended to achieve this goal. And this is a conversation that I've had with some builders is, you know, when you look at the total cost of construction and building, and you look at the payback, I think the conversation of payback sometimes doesn't go that far, because the payback is very long and you're only going to be in that first house, you know, maybe 5 to like 7 years. So you're not looking at it past that. But the other part that we're looking at right now is the affordability. So if you look at the cost of your bills for that more like high performance home, what does that mean for you per month now, right? And like, I think going a little bit away from this question, but it's how do you look at the cost of that building? Because at the end of the day, like in some cases, it'll cost more as you go up the tiers. But how can you show that to the consumer of what it's actually going to impact, aside from the energy efficiency and the carbon, but like to their monthly budget?
Can my nebulous mind take a shot at that one? I think the short answer is yes, and I'll explain why I'm thinking that, because it's a fabulous question. But let's assume, like most things in the universe, building performance follows some kind of normalized bell curve. And I'm going to have a high-end project and a low-end project. And if we talk about energy efficiency and base buildings, because I think that's really what the key is, you know, you look at a project, and let's say 50% of it is structural mechanical, 30% of it is standard, you know, walls and partition construction, 20% of it finishes, equipment, and everything else. If I am dealing with the 80% in the code, and I increase the regulation, I by definition push the low end of that bell curve up or farther down the graph, narrowing the band. That alone, I think, answers the question. It says, yes, it should. Now, where it gets a little bit more nebulous, I like your word, Juan, is that do you have a corresponding push on the other end to address it? I don't know. That is a really, now we're talking building economics, and I wish we had a banker in the room. But I think the short answer is yes, it does, because it will always push the bulk of the cost towards the higher end.
I'll try to answer that too. I absolutely agree. We need to, I love the idea of, yes, there's a cost, an incremental cost to build a high performance, but we need to think about, there's two price tags, the cost to build and the cost to operate, and that long-term impact. We also need to think about future-proofing our buildings. You know, yes, especially in Alberta, we've got low-cost natural gas, but in a net zero carbon, when we're trying to decarbonize natural gas, we're talking about renewable natural gas. We're talking about natural gas with carbon capture and storage, and that's a much higher cost. So we need to think about that long-term impact and the benefits of building to high performance earlier on. The other thing I think we probably don't do a very good job in educating consumers about is, you know, you talked about probably first-time home buyers only going to be in their home for 5 years. The premium that you can then get on selling a high-performance home. The access you can get as a home buyer on preferred mortgage financing. We're starting to see Emily Karen, if you had a chance to listen to her during the Deep Energy Retrofit panel, talked about her access to mortgage financing, which unlocks a lot of low-cost, longer-term capital to be able to do these things. And banks now they have set their own carbon targets. They need to strategically invest. They don't know how to do that, and there's real opportunity in investing in high-performance homes. What I don't think yet we've seen, insurance premiums. When we're thinking about low-carbon, resilient homes, the insurance industry is going to be looking at that much more closely when we're thinking about resiliency, about wind, fire protection. I think there's real value, and we need to demonstrate that and communicate that to the market.
Okay, you got 30 seconds.
Okay, perfect, because Lauren said everything that I was going to say anyway. But I will chime in that, like, yeah, I think the life cycle cost is the most important thing to look at, and at least the analysis that we've seen is that there's a positive benefit for the homeowner. We talk a lot about affordability, and I think there are ways to offset that capital cost, such as green financing, and it's an exciting opportunity when banks might give you, I think, you know, if I can get 1% or 1.5%, then suddenly that monthly premium for my emissions neutral building home is equal to my code built home. It's less risk for them. You get a better product for the homeowner, better, more resilient home and everything too. It's just the right thing to do. So let's skip those intermediate tiers, just go straight to the end,
Whoa.
and we'll all have great homes to live in.
Leave it with the bomb. All right, thank you, everybody. You know, that was great.